Now, before we go into this, foregoing the standard bit of title sequencing for this particular feature, I just want to say that Heaven's Gate is a film with a very, very rocky history, and is pretty much the poster child for the end of the second golden age of Hollywood, when directors were once again in control and could do whatever they wanted. Heaven's Gate's story is one of betrayal, corruption, greed, and ultimately the pursuit of perfection. However, it's much longer than I could do justice here, so I strongly recommend you check out the documentary Final Cut, The Making and Unmaking of Heaven's Gate. It's a great watch, you can find it for free on YouTube. Really strongly suggest that you look that up. Now with that out of the way, let's dive in. Heaven's Gate is a fictionalized account of the Johnson County War, a conflict in late 19th century Wyoming between immigrant settlers and the wealthy landowners, ultimately leading to violent attacks on the former by hired guns. At the center of it is Marshall Averill, a former aristocrat with close ties to the immigrant community, who is also in love with a local bordello madam, Ella, competing affections with the more methodical hired killer, Nate Champion, who seems to drift between the two sides in conflict. Eventually, the situation mushrooms into a full-out war on the plains of Wyoming, with the government and even local army forces being completely passive and not willing to help the immigrants in their conflict. Here, Cimino has assembled a top team of actors, and of course, they all do really great work. Kristofferson holds himself well in the lead, being able to be both a stern man of business, a warm lover, and even a mischievous and lively young man during the flashbacks in Harvard that open the film. French actress Isabelle Huppert as Ella, despite her accent, gives the role the needed brash and sass, allowing us to buy her as a tough woman of the frontier, while also having a soft spot for Averill. And rounding out the main triumvirate is Christopher Walken as the ruthless Nate Champion, and well, it's Walken. The man knows how to play someone who is sort of mechanical, stoic, and blunt, especially his introduction where he kills an immigrant. He's almost like a silent angel of death, and it's a really great and surprisingly tense moment with practically no dialogue from Walken. Supporting them are the likes of Jeff Bridges, John Hurt, and even a young Brad Dourif and Mickey Rourke. And well, they all contribute solid work, though Rourke is a little more than a cameo here as a young man who looks up to Champion, and here Hurt is reduced to a little more than drunken swagger and reciting iconic philosophers and poets, when Cimino feels the need to emphasize even more the morose and morbid nature of affairs in Wyoming. And as for Bridges, he's once again playing the lovable best friend and savvy business type, but also with a very personal tie to the community of immigrants and willing to do anything to make sure that everyone is safe. And he plays off of Kristofferson and Huppert well, making you buy their relationship, as having been friends for quite some time. Speaking from a purely technical level, Heaven's Gate is, beyond all doubts, one of the most gorgeous films the 1980s ever produced. The vast, sweeping plains, ranges, and mountains photographed by veteran filmer Sigmund are nothing short of jaw-dropping in their absolute beauty, rivaling even the most famous scenes from any David Lean or Cecil B. DeMille epic. Furthermore, the somewhat diffused light and very slight tint to the picture also gives the film a sort of nostalgic, almost old photograph aesthetic that fits well with the film's themes. More on that in a bit. And when it comes to the battles, most of which take place at the end of the film, Cimino pulls in, taking a more immediate approach, often entrenched in smoke and dust clouds, making you feel like you're in the midst of the chaos of warfare. Also commendable is the score, written by newcomer David Mansfield, who also features as a violinist in the film. Trading in the grandeur, synth, and testosterone produced by more iconic western and epic scores, Mansfield opts for something more harmonic and ethnic, obviously taking cues from the backgrounds of the Eastern immigrants. He makes amazing use of violins, especially during the film's main theme, very much tying it to the land and livelihoods of these people, while also giving it a pseudo-thoughtful yet also tragic vibe which continues throughout the score, and fits well with the film's sometimes somber nature. In fact, on that note, we now come to the script, also written by Cimino, and it's now where things start to get a little bit hazy. Heaven's Gate is a lot of things. Romantic epic, revisionist history, anti-western, social critique, a war story, a slow burn drama, a visual extravaganza, and a more thoughtful, thinking type of piece. Certainly a lot of ingredients in this recipe and very befitting the extravagant nature of the production. But the key question is then, what does it amount to, and do these parts ever come together? Well, I can put it like this. Heaven's Gate is very much a concept over character style of film, one more intent on producing a certain type of message or idea than necessarily focusing on full characterization or coherent, consistent plotting. Cimino's previous effort, The Deer Hunter, was very much like that, looking at the dehumanization powers of war, even though the characters themselves were not exactly terribly layered, and some sections of the story, especially the opening out in the woods, felt rambly and a little longer than needed to achieve some of its thematic imagery as well as kind of affecting the pacing. That approach makes a return in Heaven's Gate, though the canvas is considerably larger this time, as well as the topics covered. In the end, Heaven's Gate is very much about futility and how for all our changes and learning and even desire, the world does not always play a fair hand and usually will favor those who can write the larger bank check. Our lead, once a fresh-faced, wax-philosophical Harvard graduate as the opening shows, gives way to a tired, edgier, less enthused older man, even at points settling for apathy and submission to affairs because of the hand life deals him, with many of his co-stars ultimately sharing in this mentality in some form or another. Social critique is a key ingredient here, showing us how the poor immigrants are doing whatever they can to survive, while the wealthy landowners speak of their beautiful land, their property, and these people in a dour business-like fashion, treating their planned mass genocide against them as if it's just another lunch at 2 appointment on Wednesday for them. That's a pretty frightening thought right there, but alas, one that, well, as we all know from history, is often too true. If for nothing else, Heaven's Gate's ambition to merge large-scale spectacle with legitimate critiques of society and human nature is to be respected, and coupled with the potent imagery, Heaven's Gate gets a lot of mileage out considering its hefty near 4-hour runtime in its new complete cut. Of course, this doesn't necessarily change that its characters are pretty much stuck in archetypes and are in very much service of Cimino's ideas, and there are indeed those longer than needed stretches that feel like indulgence, mostly lingering on expansive shots or dragging out showy set-piece sequences like the various dances, especially the opening at Harvard where a group of students and their girlfriends are just dancing around in the middle of the university. Yet we get it, Cimino, it looks nice, and I won't take away from the fact that it's obvious it took a lot of time there, but it doesn't really push the story forward, and we already get the fact that Averill is supposed to be a wide, hopeful young man, and that he will later become desensitized by what happens in Wyoming. And while a few seconds may not sound like much, in film time it's quite a deal, and given these happen a number of times throughout the film, these little bits do add up to a consistent irritant to the pacing. But regardless, Heaven's Gate, especially in its aforementioned fully restored director's cut, which is what is being reviewed here, is definitely a very fascinating watch. Those intrigued, the all-new cut is available on DVD and Blu-ray both in Region 1 as part of the prestigious Criterion Collection, and in Region 2 courtesy of Second Sight Films. However, avoid the MGM releases like the plague, as these are the older, shorter, butchered cuts and the ones with absolutely no remastering put into them, hence giving it that all too iconic sepia tone look that the film has often been stuck with, even though that wasn't how it was originally photographed, and the newer versions clean it up a lot. And so, to close this off, I award Heaven's Gate a silver star. Perhaps it's a little too ambitious for its own good, but there is no denying said ambition is visible on the screen for all to see and be admired. No one can accuse Cimino of not trying, though one can certainly accuse him of indulgence, and the film is worth seeing for its sheer uniqueness as well as historical significance. It's not a short trip, but I think it's one definitely worth taking. And so, join me next time for the final part of Bond Month and my 100th review when I look at a film that was so bad It never got released again after its original theatrical run. May God have mercy on us all.